It was a Monday morning, sharp and cold, and the air in the boardroom was tighter than ever. The kind of silence where you could hear even a deep breath feel like an interruption. Jenna Monroe sat at the long glass table surrounded by the men she'd worked alongside for 6 years. Her hands were folded calmly, her notepad open in front of her, but her eyes, they scanned the room with quiet calculation. Something felt off. The CEO, Richard Hale, in his usual sharp navy suit and smug composure, stood at the head of the table, flipping a presentation clicker between his fingers. The man had always been known for theatrics, but today, it wasn't just a pitch meeting. "Before we proceed," he said, voice echoing a bit too cheerfully, "I have an announcement." Jenna's spine straightened instinctively. The others glanced at one another, but most avoided her gaze. Her heart thudded once, hard, but she kept her face unreadable. Richard continued, "It's time we make some structural changes to this leadership team. We've had a good run, but it's become increasingly clear that emotional inconsistency and personal bias have held us back." His eyes landed on her. Jenna didn't blink. "I'm letting Jenna go." Silence. No one moved. A few heads bowed. Someone scribbled nervously in his notebook. Jenna didn't move either. Not because she was shocked. She'd felt this coming. She'd felt the condescension growing in each meeting, the way her ideas were dismissed with a chuckle, only to be pitched by someone else 5 minutes later and praised. She'd felt the fake smiles. Richard added, his voice now dripping arrogance, "We need clearer heads in this room. Less drama. More drive. Jenna's done, well, she's done her best. But this isn't the space for emotional volatility." That was it. That was the line that would haunt him. Jenna stood up slowly, pushing the chair back without a sound. She smiled, not wide, not fake, just calm. And that calmness rattled him more than if she'd screamed. She picked up her notepad, nodded once, and said, "Thank you for the opportunity." Richard smirked, thinking he'd won. "You'll land on your feet. You're a resilient woman." She paused by the door, looked back at him, and said quietly, "You're right. I am." She walked out, and the entire floor watched her go. What no one knew was that Jenna hadn't been idle these past 6 years. While she spent nights reviewing pitch decks and cleaning up after her teammates' messes, she'd also been investing, quietly, wisely. She hadn't just built her career. She'd built something bigger. And Richard had no idea what storm was coming. By 8 a.m. the next morning, the boardroom was buzzing. No one had expected an emergency meeting to be called on a Tuesday, and certainly not by the board of directors themselves. The team was already seated, coffee cups half-sipped, hushed whispers filling the space. Richard Hale, as usual, was positioned at the head of the table, but this time his confidence wavered slightly. He didn't like being caught off guard. The door creaked open. Everyone turned, and in walked Jenna Monroe. But not in the same way as yesterday. She wasn't holding a notepad. She wasn't wearing the same soft gray blazer and modest heels. Today, she wore white, bright, crisp, immaculate, and walked with the kind of poise that comes not from arrogance, but clarity. Behind her was Alan Whitmore, a longtime board member and quiet power player, and 2 senior partners from the investor group. Richard blinked once. What is this?" he said, laughing nervously, trying to command control before it slipped. "Didn't we already do this yesterday?" Jenna walked right up to the table and stood across from him. "No, Richard," she said. "Yesterday was your show. Today's mine." She calmly placed a folder on the table. One of the partners slid it across to Richard. He opened it, his eyes moving fast across the first page, then the second, then his hand started to tremble. The room went dead silent. Inside the folder was the updated shareholder report. Overnight, a significant amount of stock had changed hands. Jenna hadn't just owned shares. She'd spent the past 3 years slowly acquiring more through shell holdings and quiet acquisitions. And as of that morning, Jenna Monroe was the majority shareholder. This must be a mistake," Richard sputtered. "There's no way you. How could you afford?" Jenna tilted her head slightly. "By listening, Richard. By learning. By noticing the gaps between your ambition and your execution." She paused, then looked at everyone in the room. You underestimated me because I didn't shout, because I stayed late and cleaned up everyone's chaos, because I didn't make noise. But quiet doesn't mean weak. Sometimes it just means we're watching. She looked back at Richard. You're relieved of your duties, effective immediately. HR will facilitate your exit. Richard stood up suddenly. You can't do this. You're not. Alan interrupted, calm but firm. Actually, she can. And she just did. Richard froze. He looked around the room. No one stood up for him. Not one voice came to his defense. He left without another word, the door shutting softly behind him. That soft click was the end of his era. Jenna took the seat at the head of the table. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't trying to be heard. She was the voice now. But her revenge wouldn't be cruel. It would be purposeful. Because Jenna wasn't here to humiliate. She was here to lead. Jenna didn't waste time celebrating. By noon, she had already called her first internal meeting. Not with the board, not with investors, but with the team. The very people who sat in silence while she was fired. The same ones who once called her too soft behind her back. She could have replaced them all. No one would have blamed her. But she didn't. Instead, she stood at the front of the conference room, whiteboard behind her, a dry erase marker in her hand, and said softly, "We start fresh today." A few people didn't meet her eyes. One cleared his throat awkwardly. Another just stared at his coffee. Jenna saw it, the discomfort,
the shame,
the unspoken apologies. "I know what you're all thinking," she continued. "Yesterday, I was fired in front of you, and no one stood up for me." Silence. She smiled gently, not to mock, but to disarm. "I get it. This place hasn't made it easy to speak up. We've all worked under fear, not inspiration. That ends now." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Let me be clear. I didn't come back for revenge. I came back because this company matters. And I believe you can be better. I believe we can be better. But that starts with accountability." Then she paused, walked slowly to the whiteboard, and wrote 3 words: respect, integrity, purpose. For the next 90 days, every project, every decision, every meeting will be measured by these. If you lead with ego, there's no seat for you here. If you lead with growth, I'll invest in you personally. One of the junior analysts, Maya, raised her hand hesitantly. "So, you're not letting us go?" Jenna looked at her, then looked around the room.
No.
"But I'm watching who's ready to rebuild, and who's just waiting for power to shift again. This company has been running on fear long enough. We're done with that." There was a quiet sigh from the back of the room, not of frustration, but relief. For the first time in years, people weren't afraid of speaking. After the meeting, several employees stayed behind. One of the senior developers, Trevor, approached her and said with lowered eyes, "I'm sorry I didn't speak up yesterday. I wanted to." I froze. Jenna looked him in the eye. "I understand." He hesitated. "You do?" "Yes," she replied. "But understanding doesn't mean I'll tolerate it again."
Grow.
Or go. That was her new philosophy. Compassion, but never at the cost of standards. That night, as she sat in her office, the same one Richard once held like a throne, she looked out the floor-to-ceiling window and whispered to herself, "It starts now." Not revenge. Not rage. Redemption. But there were still secrets in the company. And not everyone was happy to see her rise. Jenna stayed late at the office that week. Not out of pressure, but purpose. The desk no longer felt like a battlefield. It was a control tower now. Her fingers danced over spreadsheets, legal memos, internal reports, the layers Richard Hale had buried under shallow charm and fake numbers. He'd polished this company on the outside while letting it rot from within. Jenna knew the difference between a brand and a business. She wasn't here to make it look better. She was here to make it real. But as she read deeper into the financial statements, something wasn't right. There were red flags she hadn't noticed before: hidden accounts, misappropriated marketing funds, partnerships with third-party vendors that weren't real companies. These weren't just bad decisions. They were deliberate lies. And she hadn't been the only one kept in the dark. Jenna sat back in her chair, rubbing her temple. Her instincts burned. Something was still happening. Someone was still working against her, long after Richard's exit. The next morning, she called a private audit. Quiet. Controlled. No announcements. She needed clarity, not panic. By noon, her suspicions were confirmed. A senior executive, Daniel Prescott, had been siphoning funds through dummy vendors for nearly 2 years. He was quiet, well-liked, always agreeable. But beneath that agreeable smile was a man who had built a safety net for himself at the company's expense. And Richard had known. In fact, the payments spiked every quarter during Jenna's project presentations, the very ones that had been shot down for budget concerns. It hadn't been about money. It had been about keeping her out of the way. She sat in silence, jaw clenched. Not with rage, but with a fire that burned far deeper. This wasn't just workplace betrayal. This was the kind of quiet sabotage women like her were used to. Dismissed with a smile. Undermined with politeness. Gutted with a compliment. She requested a meeting with Daniel at 3 p.m. sharp. He walked in like he owned the building. Slick suit. Polished watch. That practiced, disarming grin. "Jenna," he said smoothly. "I heard you wanted to meet. Is this about the vendor rotation? I know things got shifted around when Richard left." Jenna didn't answer right away. She pushed a single file across the desk. No words. Daniel opened it and paled. Invoices. Account trails. Transfers. IP addresses. Emails. It was airtight. Still, he tried. This can't be. Jenna, this must be a mistake. These vendors, these aren't all mine." She raised her hand, cutting him off with calm steel. "Daniel, don't insult both of us." He sat back, color draining. "So what now? You're firing me?" "No," Jenna said. "You'll resign. Quietly. And all the funds will be returned. Within 72 hours. Or the board sees this, and legal action starts Monday morning." Daniel stared at her. "You won't survive this kind of scandal. The stock will drop. You need to think." "I am thinking," she said. "That's the difference between us." And then she leaned forward. "Do you want to know why Richard let you get away with it? Because it served his narrative. Every dollar you stole was a reason to say, 'We can't fund Jenna's project.' It justified keeping me small." Her voice broke for a second, but not from weakness. From truth. Daniel's eyes flickered. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe fear. She didn't care anymore. "You made a career off staying invisible," she said quietly. "But I see you now. I see all of you." She stood. 72 hours. Don't test my patience. Daniel left the office without a word. She watched him go, and then locked the door behind him. When she turned back toward her desk, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt hollow. She didn't want this kind of power. But she'd earned it. She had paid for it in silence, in years of overlooked nights, in ideas stolen, in meetings where her voice had been talked over like background noise. And now, she wasn't invisible, but being seen came with a cost. That night, Jenna sat alone on the rooftop of the office. The city lights stretched below her, vast and brilliant. She thought about how many women had been fired, mocked, erased, and how few had ever been given the chance to return. She wasn't going to waste hers. She took out her phone, opened her notes app, and started writing something personal. Not a press statement. Not a corporate update. A message.
To the team.
To the board. To every intern, every assistant, every person who'd once felt like she had. Power doesn't always look like a loud voice. Sometimes it's just the person who stayed.
Who watched.
Who learned. Who came back, not to burn it all down, but to build something worth staying for. She hit save. And closed her eyes. She was tired. But she wasn't finished. Not yet. The boardroom was full again. But this time, it wasn't for crisis control. No emergency shareholder meeting. No dramatic firings or private confrontations. This time, everyone was here for the quarterly town hall, and for the first time in years, people were genuinely curious. Anxious, yes, but curious. Because Jenna Monroe wasn't just a name anymore. She was a presence, a shift, a conversation whispered in every hallway, printed in every press release. The woman who had been fired on a Monday and returned as the majority shareholder on a Tuesday wasn't just running the company, she was changing it. And now, she was about to speak to everyone. The entire team gathered in the company auditorium. It wasn't fancy. Just rows of gray chairs and warm overhead lights. But it felt sacred now. Something important was about to happen. Jenna stood at the front, not behind a podium, not elevated above anyone else. She stood with them. No cue cards. No flash. Just her and the silence. "I'm not here to give you a speech," she said quietly. She waited. The room listened. "I'm here to tell you a story." People leaned forward. "A few weeks ago, I was fired from this company. Right here. In front of people I once considered friends. I was called too emotional. Too soft." And for a second, she paused. Her voice caught. I believed it. Not because it was true, but because it had been said so many times in so many subtle ways that it started to sound like fact. The whole room was still. "But here's the thing," she continued. "Being emotional isn't a weakness. Feeling things deeply, caring about outcomes, listening with empathy, choosing people over profits, that's not bad business. That's real leadership." She looked out across the crowd. Some eyes welled up. "I didn't come back to get even. I came back because I know what this place could be if we stop running it like a boys' club behind closed doors. I came back because some of you are brilliant and kind and overworked and unseen. And I see you." The applause started slowly, then rose like thunder. But she raised her hand.
"There's more," she said.
"Accountability isn't just about calling out the bad. It's about calling in the good. So I've spent the last 2 weeks watching, listening, learning, not just about what's broken but who's still trying." She turned slightly and gestured to the side doors. One by one, names began to appear on the big screen behind her. Promotions. New department heads. Salary restorations. Bonuses that had been frozen for years finally released.
Gasps. Cheers.
One assistant in the second row covered her mouth and sobbed into her hands. Jenna smiled at her, then said, "This isn't a handout. This is a correction." Then she paused. A long, meaningful pause. "And lastly, to those of you who stood silent when I was dismissed, this isn't a grudge. But I want you to think about what silence costs. Because next time it might not be me." She let that truth settle. Then, softer. "But if you're still here, I believe you're ready to do better. And I want to build with people who are ready." By now, the entire auditorium was on their feet. But she didn't bask in it. She turned to the side, stepped down, and walked into the crowd. Not to be praised, but to be among them. A leader not above. A leader among. 1 week later, the headlines read, "The Monroe Method, from fired to firm leader. The woman who quietly took over a giant. Grace and power. Jenna Monroe redefines leadership with kindness and strategy." The company's stock hadn't just recovered, it surged. Investors appreciated the transparency. The public loved the message. And employees? They stayed late voluntarily, not out of fear, but because they believed again. On Friday morning, Jenna sat in the small cafe across the street. Same table where she used to cry over weekend edits and late-night rejection emails. But today, she sat with a warm coffee, a soft smile, and peace in her chest. A young woman, maybe 23, approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, you're Jenna Monroe, right?" Jenna looked up. "Yes." The girl smiled nervously. I just wanted to say thank you. I work in media analytics. I watched what you did. It made me feel like maybe I could keep going." Jenna stood and gently touched the girl's arm. "You can. And one day, they'll see you too." The girl beamed and walked away. Jenna turned back to her coffee, the steam curling into the morning light. She didn't need a throne. She didn't need revenge. She had built something stronger. A legacy. Not by breaking them down, but by rising, quietly, firmly, brilliantly. They said she was too emotional. And maybe she was. But emotion, when paired with vision, with strength, with purpose, that's how you rebuild an empire. And this time, she was building it her way.